After World War II, there was a baby boom. These kids, known as the baby boomer generation, would be the first to have a specific teenager youth culture. This was in part of technological media investments and a good economy, allowing teenagers to be consumers for the first time. At this time, there was also a rise in juvenile delinquency, this being the habitual committing of criminal acts or offenses by a young person, especially one below the age at which ordinary criminal prosecution is available. Youth culture was deemed to be a possible reason for juvenile delinquency, and that included youth-specific mediums such as comic books. Comic books went on to be demonized by psychiatrists, church officials, members of PTAs, and local politicians who had been for years trying to link comic books to juvenile delinquency, illiteracy, and moral corruption. The societal and eventual government pressures for censorship led to major comic publishers to come together and create the Comic Magazine Association of America, the CMAA. The CMAA then created the Comics Code Authority, the CCA, which was an administrative body to self-censor their published works. This worked as comics that were deemed appropriate for all audiences would receive a stamp of approval, and doing so eventually led to fear-mongering dying down and allow the comics industry to operate without bad publicity. While this appeased those who were against comics and seemingly allowed for the comic book industry to go back to the way it was before, it didn't go back to normal. Comics were censored and stripped down to the point a thriving company, Entertaining Comics, or EC Comics, who was famous for their Tales from the Crypt series and Mad Comics, went under, only holding on to Magazine because it was transitioned from its original comic format. The creation of the CCA was great for companies like DC and Marvel, but to any company producing anything with themes of sex, explicit violence, or dissent were to go without the CCA's seal of approval, hurting their ability to gain success or even be published. The censorship for the art form was not met with acceptance by everyone, though, as many who were part of the pre-CCA comics era did their best to keep their art form alive through the creation of fanzines, which is magazines usually produced by amateurs for fans of a particular performer, group, or form of entertainment. These amateur comics are the underground comics movement, the X in comics being X-rated and taboo content that responded to the counterculture movement. An example of this was Foo, published by Charles and Robert Crumb, 16 and 14 at the time. Foo lovingly imitated EC and other comics of the pre-code era. It was an ambitious venture. The first issue was photocopied, a very new technology in 1958, and the second two were printed in offset press runs of 300. The two brothers were not the only ones doing this, as there is a community of comic artists and writers who are creating and self-printing and publishing their work. The underground comics movement allowed for those who were involved in pre-CCA to maintain that level of uncensored creativity and freedom. Foo inspired many to follow suit and create their own fanzines. Jared Gardner goes on to write about an example of one of those inspired in Before the Underground. He speaks on how Don Doler and his friends Mark Tarka, who created Wild, went on to start running off multiple copies on a Ditto machine and then mailing the copies to subscribers. Then going on to create a few different issues, with one of them being Smudge. Smudge is an important comic as it is where a massive figure for the movement, Art Spiegelman, started, as he began creating art for Smudge in 1962. What makes Spiegelman important to the movement is that in 1986, he went on to create Mouse. Mouse was a comic memoir of his father who lived through Nazi Germany and the Holocaust. The book won a Pulitzer, solidifying graphic novels as a proper medium with artistic merit, pulling the medium away from the stereotypes it once had. Comics had long struggled to be recognized as a legitimate artistic medium, and Spiegelman's winning of a Pulitzer was proof of their merit. Along with this, his story being one full book rather than a series of issues led to graphic novels becoming the dominant form of what was once comics and series. The underground comics movement was a way to step past the CCA and the barriers set by societal and governmental pressures. Not all consumers wanted superheroes, and many wanted to explore adult themes through the medium. While the underground comics movement was something of an area in which comics of sex, drugs, and violence may circulate, it was also an area in which ideas of freedom and self-expression circulated. During a time of massive societal issues and governmental upset, people wanted a medium to express themselves and their dissatisfaction. What some may view as unnecessary obscenity can be described as wanting to just do something outrageous because everything was so fucked up. In Jeffrey Lewis's Comics Art, Cultural Norms, and the Societal Consciousness of Activism in American Democracy, he quotes Mary Fleener saying that it was a reaction of just a big middle finger to the establishment. I think that's why it succeeded. because it was a true intent of frustration and rage, and that comes out in creativity, and that's what seems to make people very creative. They only say what they mean when they're angry. The artists of the movement would do what they could with their newfound freedom of expression, sometimes just to do so. It was to show that they were no longer censored and had overcome it.